Gary, let me ask you right out of the box. You've done this 44 years. That's all you've done. What's the worst medical malpractice case you've ever seen?
I've seen so many awful things, but the one that strikes me as the worst is a woman who just 4 or 5 years ago died just after she gave birth in a hospital in West Palm Beach. It involved a doctor who had previously caused the death of 6 women and mutilated multiple babies, causing brain damage and other awful things. And the hospital knew about it. The state knew about it. They kept finding him negligent, but slapping his wrist. And the last time they slapped his wrist was 2 months before my lady entered the hospital to give birth, and she bled to death. And as a result, finally, of pressure by me, pressure by the press, and so on, they revoked his license permanently.
I applaud you for that. And I know it's always been a problem with the state enforcing its rules and disciplining doctors because oftentimes they're the cause of the malpractice crisis. Welcome to the Interesting Lawyers Podcast. Today we have a 44-plus year medical malpractice lawyer. When it comes to medical malpractice, I don't think there's any question that Gary Cohen is the most qualified and experienced medical malpractice lawyer. It's all he's ever done. He's only worked for great firms, and he is partners with Stuart Grossman, Neil Roth, Andy Yaffa et al. At the firm of Grossman, Roth, Yaffa, and Cohen. Stuart Grossman was recently on an episode. They're a tremendous firm. They're really known as one of the best firms, and I'm really honored to have Gary join us today. Gary, thank you so much for coming.
It's my pleasure.
Where does Florida stand in the United States in terms of medical malpractice rates, cases, claims, and just quality of care?
Pretty low. And there are several reasons for that. But if you go to all the other states, like I have over the years traveling for experts in various fields, and you speak to them, they always shake their head when it comes to Florida. Like this, oh God, there's another Florida case. And they always talk about the standard being, because they review all the records in a case and depositions and such, and they just look at it like they're looking at the worst of the worst.
Are you saying that that in other states, people look down on Florida and think that there's a lower standard of care in Florida? People get worse treatment in Florida?
You not only think it, they're correct.
Let's expand that question to the United States. Where does the United States stand globally in terms of medical outcomes, medical statistics, deaths? You were sharing some of that with me beforehand. Tell us about that.
The United States, although we spend more on our medical care and technology than any other country in the world by far, we are ranked anywhere between 37th and 67th, depending on the ranking, in the world, the industrialized world, for healthcare, meaning they get better outcomes, they have longer lives, they have less accidents, malpractice.
When you say they, you mean other countries?
Other countries, other industrialized countries, and there are a lot of them, such as Canada, Japan, England, and France, and Spain, and on. We're down number 37. And above us are some countries you wouldn't believe have worse care than we do, considering our money, the richness of this country. But there's a little tweak in that, and that is the profit edge in the United States is what medicine is about many times.
So let's talk about that. I know that big corporations are coming in. They came in a long time ago and started buying up hospitals, but now I notice they're buying a lot of individual medical practices. What's happening across the landscape in the U.S. with this big medical industrial complex that it looks like that's where it's all headed?
That's where it's currently headed and been headed for about 5 years and getting incredibly worse. Hospital corporations like HCA, Hospital Corporation of America, Tenet, and Adventist Health are now buying up almost all of Florida's hospitals. If you go locally here, what used to be individual, privately owned hospitals are now owned by Baptist Medical Group. And they own tons of hospitals in Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and they're moving north. It's actually one of the better groups, but it's becoming commercialized. HCA and Tenet and others are buying individual practices, a practice of anesthesiologists, a practice of internists and hospitalists and radiologists and so on. And by doing that, they have control over those people, and they have control, most importantly for them, they have control over the profit. How are we going to make money? How much can we squeeze into one day? How little time can we spend with a patient to maximize how many people you can see in a day? And how can we cut the nursing staffs so that who are already under intense pressure and being squeezed from every direction and underpaid, how can we squeeze it even more? Let's drip every dollar out of it.
So do you believe that with the influx of these corporations, these big companies, buying up practices and hospitals across the United States, I know there's also national players like Cleveland Clinic and others like that, but do you believe that corporations getting involved at that level in medicine has actually reduced the standard of care across this country?
Yes, and I've seen it over and over again. And I've seen investigative stories done on it, both in writing and on television, with specific HCA hospitals, for example, and others. And they talk about it being, some hospitals of theirs in Florida being graded number 1 from Medicare. It's 1 to 5. And they're number 1, meaning the lowest. And they're year after year, and yet they're allowed to continue the full practice of emergency care, operative care, et cetera, et cetera. They're not punished for it.
Do you think maybe we should have national health care instead, like they have over in England?
That's a very controversial topic. I look at it a little differently. I look at it as a nationally regulated insurance, a little bit unlike the Affordable Care Act, although that did help over 30 million people get insurance that didn't have it before. I look at it this way. If you buy private insurance, it's very likely going to be somehow involved with one of these hospital corporations on a multi-billion-dollar level. And so they have deals worked out. I would rather have an option of getting health insurance from the United States government, paying into it, not for free, pay for people who can't afford and people who are poverty-stricken. Obviously, there'll be help to them, but pay into a system that's not worried about profit. The United States won't be worried about the profits being made. They can concentrate on standard of care, on better practice. And if it's your option, if you want to go to a place that is a profit center, go ahead. If you want to go to McDonald's for your dinner, or do you want to go to a steakhouse? If you are paying McDonald's prices and you go into a place, fast food like a McDonald's, you're going to get a burger, but it's not going to be that great a burger. But it costs you less.
Look, you see the bad results. Sometimes I know they're really not caused by malpractice, but oftentimes they are. And your firm has a reputation for only taking and handling the very best cases, which really means the most egregious cases, so you see it all. With that said, do you feel that these corporate players who own hospitals and are snapping up medical practices, that they are causing a lot of the problems and ultimately a lot of the results that end up on your desk?
Yes, there's no question about it.
More so than before?
Much more so than before. And the strange thing from the standpoint of a medical malpractice lawyer and an injured patient is that because they're buying up these practices, there's plenty of insurance coverage for a patient once they commit malpractice upon them. But the bad news is it increases the amount of malpractice because, again, time is money. Time should not be money when it comes to medicine and people's health care.
And the profit motive itself, would you say that's one of the greatest drivers when it comes to the quality of care? In other words, the more money they can keep, the less they have to spend on patient care, on giving certain tests and whatnot.
There's absolutely no question about it. And there have been numerous recent studies from the Journal of American Medical Association, from the New England Journal of Medicine, as well as many others, speaking directly to that point. It's not my opinion, although it is, but it's not just my opinion. It's the opinion of the doctors' groups themselves.
I know that your firm also handles cosmetic surgery cases. Very recently, the governor of Florida signed a law requiring some of these surgical centers for cosmetic surgery, which are storefronts, businesses with brochures and marketing and all of that. requiring them not only to get insurance, but also specifying certain things that they have to do now to avoid bad outcomes. What is the overall landscape in the United States when it comes to plastic surgery, the profit motive, and the problems inherent with that particular side of medicine?
There's two different sides of plastic surgery. There's the legitimate side, people with legitimate needs or legitimate problems that need correction. And you have board-certified plastic surgeons. They've gone through the training, rigorous training through many years in medical school and then residencies and fellowships to become plastic surgeons. You have the sleazy side, unfortunately, and that's growing, especially here in South Florida, places like Beverly Hills, where people are basically inundated with magazines and TV shows where everyone has to look perfect. And it's taken advantage of. And it makes a lot of money because it's not involving insurance. You have to pay up front. And so there's a price war that goes on, like McDonald's. Again, you're going to a McDonald's surgeon in Miami, say. You're coming from many times from South America. They fly in for the day. They meet the doctor in the operating room for the first time, who has a list of what they want to do, and say, is this what you want done? Yes. Okay, put them to sleep. And they either wake up dead, okay, or they wake up mangled. And that's because those are not generally board-certified plastic surgeons. Those are internists, general surgeons, people with all sorts of medical degrees that have never gone through what a truly board-certified plastic surgeon does, and they don't care about anything but profit. How many plastic surgeries can we fit in a day? The state has now regulated that to 3. For years and years before that, it was as many as you can fit in a day. And they would have an assembly line. They'd have people doing various liposuction and cutting and getting ready for the surgeon to come in and do the fat injections into a Brazilian butt lift, for example.
I know there have been a lot of bad outcomes in the Brazilian butt lift cases. What have those outcomes been generally? What happens?
What you do in those cases is you take out fat from one part of the body and you inject it into the butt of a patient. And you're supposed to do it just under the skin, subcutaneous it's called. Just below the skin is where you're supposed to inject that. By not having ultrasounds, which were not required before this new law, and by not being careful and having plenty of time because you have 10 more patients waiting, very often that is injected into the muscle. And if it's injected into the muscle, it gets into the bloodstream and causes emboluses to the lung. Fat embolus, pieces of fat break off, go through the blood system, go to the lung, and kill you.
Wow. I know you haven't handled a lot of those cases because most of these places have no insurance in the first place. Right. And when that happens, those people are really out of luck.
Yes.
They don't even have a remedy.
No, and the problem it is, the inducement for it to these people is we can do it for half the price of one of these fancy surgeons who actually know what they're doing. And we can do it in one day, you're in and out. You can fly home tomorrow or go home tomorrow if you live locally. And people are fooled by that and they show them brochures and TV videos on how great they are and what the outcomes look like. They show a computer outcome.
A lot of marketing.
Incredible marketing. Unfortunately, they're incredibly deadly.
What about going to foreign countries to get plastic surgery done? I keep hearing about that from people. Some great doctor in Mexico or in Costa Rica or whatever. What's your point of view on that? Because you have a unique point of view as someone who has probably seen more of these cases than anyone.
My point of view is don't. It's very simple. If it's too good to be true on the price, or if it's too good to be true to have to fly 2,000 miles for a butt lift, there's a reason it's too good to be true. It's because it's not true.
But have you seen bad outcomes for work done in other countries as well?
They're even less regulated. They can just about do what they want, and they don't have a tort system like we do, where if the doctor does cause death or dismemberment or whatever, they're not held responsible by anybody.
Okay. I would like to talk to you about technology and the future. By the way, nice new website.
Oh, thank you.
For your firm.
I had nothing to do with it. Thank you.
Have you worked on any cases involving robotic surgery?
Yes.
What is the overall, Gary, on robotic surgery? And would you have it if you needed it?
Again, there's two sides to it, as always. If in the right circumstance, with the right doctor in the right hospital, they can save an extremely expensive, painful surgery and do a way that scopically they get in, they see what the problem is, something they have to cut out, something they have to bring down, removing a gallbladder, those kind of things. Hysterectomies now are done that way without cutting you open. And when done correctly, again, with the right surgeon, they can be very effective, and you are literally out of the hospital that day or the next day and recover incredibly easier than you would with being cut open.
What's the dark side of the robots?
The dark side of robots is they're robots. They're not human. Now, the human runs the machine technically, but the robot also does its own thing at certain stages of the surgery. That's what they use them for. They're not just automatons where they just do the whole surgery themselves. They're guided, but they also guide themselves in certain ways. And they don't have human intuition. They don't have the sight on their periphery like we do when we're coming to a stop sign and you just know something's not right. Someone's going to run a stop sign on the other side and you're going to smash into you. You have that human part of it and judgment. People who have done this properly have had 12 years of schooling and training just to do this. And then you turn it over into the hands of a robot. Would I have one? Yes, in the right hands. If I had to have a procedure where they didn't have to crack my chest open or cut my belly open, and it was a relatively safe procedure, yes, in the right hands.
Don't you think they're going to have robotic doctors and nurses in the near future?
They have them in certain hospitals in Florida. Orlando Health is another system now. It used to be Orlando Regional Hospital, one hospital. Now it owns all the hospitals and clinics and so on in Orlando, north and south also of Orlando. And they have robots going down the hallways, checking in on patients. They're not guided. They go in and they're told, check these rooms, they're programmed, and they go in and they're supposed to look at vital signs and somehow make an assessment of how the patient is doing. The doctor can also get on a screen with those robots, the doctor who's in home or could be on vacation in Indiana. The case I had was dealt exactly with that. For example, the doctor was in his hotel room in Indiana and the robot was assessing the patient. And of course, that patient died because you can't assess like a human can assess if it's done properly.
Especially from a hotel in Indiana.
Yeah. You really can't practice medicine on a computer screen.
But that's where it's all going anyway.
It is. And there's no way to stop it because progress is progress and technology is expensive and technology makes a lot of money for a lot of people. And it could be a good thing into the future.
Have you handled malpractice cases involving robotic surgery and errors made either by the robot or the operator?
Yes, both. For example, hysterectomies have been done laparoscopically for a while in most cases. And sometimes they're done because a woman is having certain problems, bleeding or other types of pain, and they've done a biopsy and they haven't seen cancer. They don't get cancer from the biopsy, but they decide she's at risk, we're going to do a hysterectomy. An older person who is not childbearing years, it may be better to be safe and do a hysterectomy. But the machines really run the show. And a lot of those machines, what they do, is what they're made to do, which is wrong, is they take like a blender to the uterus, for example, and they just whip it up. They break it up into a billion pieces and they suck it out, as opposed to carefully opening and removing and seeing exactly what you're doing, what you're cutting and what you're not cutting. And most importantly, what you're not seeing is the other side of the uterus where you may have not seen cancer on a biopsy, but it may be there. If you use one of those machines that make parts, microscopic parts, they're getting into the bloodstream and you're spreading cancer.
And you've seen that in your cases?
Yes, I've had a couple of women die from that. They didn't know at the time, but then a year or so later, they're diagnosed with cancer and it spreads all over because they think everything's fine. And by the time they're treated, it's too late. They go through 1-2 years of absolute horrible misery. And they wind up with their loved ones surrounding them as they die.
So do you think robotic hysterectomies just should not be done for those reasons?
I think hysterectomies, if you're going to do them, need to be done in a way where you have much more room to explore. And you have, because they do have cameras that they put in manually when they're doing this, but you really can't tell. Same thing with the prostate, for example, on a man. You can't tell 360 degrees what's going on the other side to biopsy. I don't like the idea of taking a machine and having it chew up something that may have cancer in it rather than just remove it. Even laparoscopically, if you remove it, you're just cutting and you're withdrawing it. You're not mashing it up into a million pieces.
I forgot to mention a story when you brought up Orlando Regional Medical Center. I'll share this with our listeners and viewers. So in 1994, I needed colon surgery. And pretty much everyone was doing the midline incisions, which meant a 10-day or 2-week recovery. But there was one guy in Orlando who my friend, a young doctor, was scrubbing with, who was doing them laparoscopically. So we said, come to Orlando and you have it done laparoscopically. So that's what I did. And it was like a 5-hour surgery, but there was one problem. In the middle of the surgery, there was a fire in the hospital. And the firefighters came into the operating room and told my surgeon to leave, and his response, I will not leave my patient.
That's a good doctor.
He finished me on generators. Obviously, I survived. I was just wondering what a robotic doctor would do. It would probably shut down in emergency mode and I'd be dead.
They do have alternate generators in hospitals for that reason, so it may shut down for a few seconds and then restart, but who knows? If the doctors are being told to leave the room, they're going to have to leave that robot in you, basically, and leave you on the table. It's a problem.
Yeah, and that's why hospitals...
And also, I must mention that people understand what you're doing when you have laparoscopic, and they make it sound so great. And it is in some ways, but think of it as when they're looking for something, an exploratory laparotomy. That means they're cutting you open because there's something wrong and they're not sure what it is, and they're looking for it. They do it with a scope, with a little camera, and they go around the cameras, and they go around looking. Think of that as a keyhole. They're looking through the keyhole, looking for this, that, or the other thing. In that keyhole, you see a small area. You can put it anywhere, but you're only seeing a certain area that you can see through a little tiny camera. What you're not seeing around you is immense. And if you open the door, on the other hand, in other words, an incision, you can see everything in the room. So you know that you're not going to hit a blood vessel that you shouldn't be hitting, or you're not going to hurt nerves that you shouldn't be hitting, and more importantly, you're going to find what you need to find. So my view of it is, if you're going to do it laparoscopically, make sure it's an extremely experienced surgeon with the credentials.
I know they use them for a lot of different procedures, but do you think overall robots help reduce the incident of malpractice by surgeons with certain techniques, certain procedures?
I think it's been proven to reduce the amounts of complications in general that people have because they're so precise. And they're run by doctors who are trained and in doing exactly that and have done it hundreds or thousands of times. My concern is the ones that have not been that experienced, that are not using the most up-to-date equipment and letting the robot make the call.
Sounds scary, but it also sounds like the reality is coming.
So it's here.
So the bottom line is business must be great for you guys, and the future must be looking great too, as malpractice lawyers, for the wrong reasons, of course.
Yeah, I'd rather not be that busy. People are dying. For example, another thing about the United States, we have the highest rate of maternal death during labor and delivery than any country in the world, industrialized country. I don't mean some small backwoods type countries that don't have the money or don't have the resources. I'm talking about dozens and dozens of major countries that are delivering children just like we do, and yet we have double, triple, or quadruple, depending on the country, the amount of maternal deaths every year, and it's getting worse.
What do you attribute that to? I know you do a lot of birth cases, obstetrical cases. For your whole career, you've been doing those.
Yes, and I'm not going to get into all the technicalities of it, but simply what's causing it is not what my opinion is again. It's what the doctors' opinions are who study this nationally. And even the USA Today, which did like a 9-part series a few years ago on this very subject, talked to doctors all over the country, agree on one thing. 50% at least of those deaths were avoidable. In other words, caused by malpractice. 50%. And it's mostly because, again, they're not following the same rules. They're run by a profit-driven hospital. They got to get these things done. The nurses are doing too much. They're being forced to do too much rather than the doctor doing it. And they're not listening to patients because they don't have the time or inclination. And the only possible cause for that kind of maternal death is the lack of caring the same way and providing the standard of care the same way that these other countries do. In addition to that, the deaths of African American women are quadruple the deaths of white women in the United States. Quadruple.
Why?
Self-obvious. It's the care they get versus the care that people who are in general not wealthy, but wealthier, have better insurance, and frankly are white in certain parts of the country. They get listened to more by the doctors and nurses. They have better insurance. And for whatever reason you want to put on it, that either deals with race or socioeconomic levels, which is what I believe, and again, not me talking, it's massive studies that have been done, show that exact number, 4 times the death. And the ones I've had, by the way, have all been African American women that have bled to death after delivering a baby.
It's really shocking to hear that in a country so advanced as ours, or so we think. Again, do you attribute that in large part to the profit motive, to the companies that are getting involved in trying to monetize medicine more than before, more than traditionally?
2 distinct things. One is those hospitals, because I've seen it firsthand, where they have cut staff so dramatically. I have one case pending against a hospital that it's an 800-patient hospital. It's not a small little place. It's an HCA hospital. They have one MRI machine for all their outpatient care and all their inpatient care. And they're a trauma center. And they're a stroke center. Now, MRIs are needed constantly if you have a stroke, if you're in an auto accident, if there's suspicion of a stroke going on that you need to scan the brain. You need them for broken bones and other things, not just x-rays. You need MRIs at times, many times. But they'll only purchase one machine.
Why don't they get more? They're
Money.
HCA.
They're a multi-billion-dollar corporation. The same reason that our former governor had HCA pay the largest fine in the history of the United States for overbilling and Medicare fraud. It's all about the profit.
Wasn't Rick Scott involved with HCA?
He
with
was
what you're talking about?
Yeah, he was the CEO or the whatever you want to call him, the top executive at HCA hospitals nationwide. And he was deposed in those cases and asked all these questions, and he took the Fifth Amendment over 80 times and was never prosecuted. But the government pressed, and they wound up with something like, I'm not going to say the numbers, but they wound up with ridiculous amount of numbers being reimbursed by HCA to the government for Medicare fraud. But it all, again, starts with profit. What are we here for? Patient care or money? Once you take the route of money, care goes not second, not third, not fourth. It falls out.
Gary, let's talk about the actual litigation process. First of all, overall, can you tell our listeners, why is medical malpractice the most difficult and challenging practice area of all to be in your opinion?
Because you're dealing with not just law. You're dealing with medicine and every kind of medicine. In my office, I have a big library filled with books. There are no legal books in that library. We have legal books in other places, but it's all medical books, textbooks. And now, of course, online, we get all the information out of textbooks and out of medical articles and such. You have to learn the medicine for an individual case as well or better than the doctor or hospital that you're suing in order to be effective. And that takes a long time to be able to do that. It takes years of training, years of experience, watching an older person do it, someone who's been around for a while, someone who you see how it is that you can pick apart a doctor who's not telling the truth, an expert witness who's been hired to defend the doctor who's not telling the truth. You have to be able to not just say you're not telling the truth, you have to be able to point them in the right direction by showing them they're just plain wrong.
So from handling these malpractice cases against hospitals, let's start with that over the years. Can you tell us the 4 or 5 things that hospitals don't want patients to know?
Yes. First of all, there's something called sovereign immunity in Florida. There are hospitals such as Hollywood Memorial Hospital, it's now the South Broward Hospital District, or Broward Health, as they call it. There's Broward Health North and there's a Broward Health South, but all in Broward County. They run, 10 approximate hospitals. They don't tell you when you come in there that if, God forbid, something happens to you as a result of malpractice, no matter how bad the injury, you can sue them, but you can sue them for as much as, and only as much as $200,000 or $300,000 if you have a spouse or children. Your injury may be such that you have to spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair or in a vegetative state. And they're not paying for that, as a private hospital would have to because of the insurance issue.
And I know that people who get those worst results in public hospitals usually end up as wards of the state. And who pays for them? We do, the taxpayers.
So they complain about, we don't want to have insurance because it would cost too much money. Meanwhile, they have huge hundreds of millions of dollars in funds sitting there in a pot that they can use for this, but they don't use it. And they'll try any case because they don't care what the verdict is. It doesn't matter to them. They have been given immunity by the state government. Now, there is a way around it, but it's almost impossible in today's environment. And that is
right, to get it from the legislature.
Yeah,
right.
You have to get a bill passed from start in the House, from the Senate, and signed by the governor, ordering them to pay either the verdict or more money than they're paying.
Okay, but in summary, give us those 4 or 5 reasons. Number 1.
Sovereign immunity.
Number
2 is the rate of complications and deaths in that particular hospital in the field that you're going in for.
And is that available publicly or online?
It's publicly available for the individual doctor. They can see how many times they've been sued. They can't see how many times they've not been sued but have botched up things. And the hospitals work differently. You can't see that information. Specifically, for example, with maternal deaths. They will not give anybody that information. The investigative reporters and the doctors who tried to do the investigations of those hospitals are just turned down flat. We're not giving you that information.
What's the third reason?
Third reason is...
Or the third thing that hospitals don't want patients to know.
They don't want you to know that when you sign these consent forms that are shoved in your face as you're being wheeled into the hospital and can't possibly read, either on an iPad nowadays or in paper, that are 4 or 5 pages long, contain all sorts of things in it that can be very destructive to your person if you are involved in a malpractice situation. They are hidden in there, are all sorts of words that even if you read, you wouldn't understand because they're put into legalese by lawyers to try to protect the hospitals from liability. And it's not like somebody sits down with you and goes over the consent forms. As anybody who knows who's ever gone into a hospital, they shove papers in front of you and sign here. I doubt any of your viewers or listeners will have an experience where they, unless they wanted to themselves because they were smart enough or experienced enough to do it, to actually sit and look and read those things.
Okay. What's number 4?
Number 4 is the issues we talked about of whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit hospital corporation, or whether they're immune. And which doctors work for them, which doctors don't work for them. Who are they responsible for, in other words? They don't tell you that.
And what's number 5?
Number 5 is, in my opinion, number 5 is one that they're never going to let go of. When something does happen, When something does go wrong, an investigation happens immediately, usually the same hour or two that the incident happens, where somebody dies precipitously, who's not supposed to die. They didn't go in there for anything that should have killed them. Or somebody is caused to have such a lack of oxygen for a prolonged period of time that their brain is half dead and they will have to live in a vegetative type state, or that they are paralyzed in some other way. They don't tell you that investigations are done. They don't tell the public that investigations are done and what they found.
You're speaking about the peer review process that hospitals have the luxury of being able to do in secret, and for the most part to keep those results secret and what they do about that.
Yes.
There's no transparency when it comes to that.
No, and there was a constitutional amendment passed a long time ago, 2004, I believe, that changed that, said that the public now is entitled to get those incident reports, but they're still fighting it. Even though the Supreme Court in Florida has ruled several times, they still don't give it to you, and when they do, they give it to you, three-quarters of it is blacked out.
I'm glad
They don't tell you as the patient, and if you ask, they'll tell you no, we don't have that, such a thing.
Why does that not surprise me? Let me just end today's episode by asking you a couple questions about the lawyers. First of all, my recollection from knowing you as long as I have is that the defense attorneys in these malpractice cases are a particularly difficult variety of people to deal with, to put it nicely. Could you tell us how that has changed over the years briefly, and nowadays what it's like to deal with defense attorneys and all of the things that they do, legit and otherwise?
Originally, when I began practicing, and for many years after that, there were certain very tough, very smart, and sometimes very even unethical defense lawyers, but everybody knew who the top 5 were in a county. These are the best of the best. And you have to be on your toes, and you have to try to outwork them, because you're not going to fool them. They're not stupid people. And they're being hired by hospitals or physicians or insurance companies that usually pay their bills because they want the best. Even if it's not a great case for them, if they know they're going to lose, they want to see if they can fight it. And so they hired really bright, long experienced people that may not be very nice, but did a much better job. As opposed to today, it's like shark-infested waters in the defense industry. If you try to tell an insurance company or one of these big hospital corporations, we better settle this case, it's really a devastatingly bad case. The plaintiff has horrible injuries or death, and this case really needs to be settled. The insurance company will fire them and go to someone else. If they lose a verdict on a case that they didn't need to go to trial on, they shouldn't have gone to trial on, and they've been that hospital's lawyer for 10 years and gotten a defense verdict after defense verdict. When they're finally hit with a big verdict, because no one knows what juries are going to do, but when they're properly and finally hit with a big plaintiff's verdict for a lot of money, they'll let go from these hospitals. And these firms now have hundreds of young lawyers running around billing hours. They stab each other in the back as much as possible. Again, like the corporations that hire them, it's all about the profit. It is not about the professionalism that we used to have, although it was at times mean and feisty. And that's fine, as long as you're within the rules. But the relationships that you built over the years, because you knew those people and you traveled with those people all over the country for expert witness depositions, and you even had lunch or dinner with those people because you're at an airport somewhere. You didn't have to like them terribly. You were constantly traveling with them. That's gone.
Do you see a difference in newer or younger lawyers who you deal with on your cases, given the fact that in 2020, everything or a lot of things in medical mal litigation and all litigation went to Zoom, hearings, depositions, mediations, conferences, things like that. What have you noticed in these newer or younger lawyers you deal with compared to the past?
With some exceptions, of course, they're not nearly as experienced or as good. What they're doing is, because they, like the hospitals, they take too many cases, these big firms. They have hundreds of lawyers many times, or at least dozens and dozens of lawyers, and they got to bill hours. They send a junior associate, somebody who's been practicing less than 5 years, sometimes less than 2 years, a brand new lawyer, in other words, to defend or take a deposition where they have no right being. They're not given the chance to become a fully responsible, educated malpractice lawyer. And they're doing that because the top lawyers are in trial all the time, or they're taking what they think to be the more important things. But the client doesn't know that. The doctor doesn't know he's being represented by a 26-year-old with no experience. The doctor doesn't know that's who's handling your case on a day-to-day basis. In the past, that was not, they had associates, but they worked closely with the senior partners. That's how they got trained. That's how they got to be good. Nowadays, it's about how many hours we can fill in a day. It doesn't matter who's handling it. And I find that very unfortunate because it's going towards the end of professionalism.
What about lawyers on the other side? I know that a lot of plaintiffs' lawyers will refer cases to you, to your firm, because they feel that you are more qualified to handle those cases. But I know a lot of younger lawyers and smaller firms that get these medical malpractice cases. Could you share with our listeners the 3 most common mistakes that you see made by lawyers who just don't know a lot about medical malpractice cases who get these in or inquiries about them?
Sure. Number one is they take the case. They have no business taking the case. They can take the case in to their office, but it should be immediately referred out to somebody with tremendous experience, whether it's my firm or another of the very good firms that have been in business for decades and have lawyers who actually know what they're doing. They should not handle that case. They get a nice referral fee, even if they just pick up the phone and call you. Florida allows a very nice referral fee, and we're grateful to give it to them. But the patient suffers if you don't get it to the right person immediately. Number 2 is they sometimes think they can handle it. I don't really do malpractice. I've done one case. This is an awfully good case. I see the negligence here, and I'm just going to handle it on my own. And within a couple of months, they are so far above their heads, monetarily and intellectually, that they have already done things that have hurt the case, that are hard to fix. And then they call you and say, look, I had this, I put it into pre-suit, but did you get this type of expert? No. Did you get this type of expert? No. Why not? Can't afford that. If you can't afford to do medical malpractice, don't do medical malpractice. Don't look for the dollar signs. Okay?
How much is a typical, I know there's no such thing as a typical malpractice case, but what's the buy-in for advanced costs for one of these cases, if you could give it a range?
The cases that don't go to litigation, that we investigate, in other words, we take a case in, it sounds interesting, we order all the medical records, and we interview the clients, and so on and so forth. But for one of many different reasons, we don't take the case, so we turn it down. That alone can cost $30,000 or $40,000 just at that stage, sometimes more.
And the most expensive part of that is finding and paying experts, top experts, to review it and spend their time.
Exactly.
Okay, keep going with the costs here. What about a viable case that ends up getting filed and litigated?
Once we get a case that we're going to take and we're going to litigate and go through what's called pre-suit and then lawsuit, all the way up to trial if necessary, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. Most trials that I've been involved in last 2 to 3 weeks at a minimum. Some have lasted 4 months. And you're looking at, and we're not talking about attorney's fees now. We're talking about money you're spending out of your pocket as the attorney.
As a plaintiff's lawyer.
As a plaintiff's lawyer. Defense lawyers get paid for everything by their insurance companies. They don't have to lay anything out of their pockets. It's to their benefit to drag it on forever. We have the opposite issue. First of all, we want the justice done as quickly as possible. We don't want to let this go 10 years before it gets to a jury, if it's going to a jury. We move it along because we front load the case. We know before we put it into pre-suit what the case is and what we're going to do with it. We don't make up our minds while we're doing it. There are new things that come up, we take care of that. But we know what we're doing first. And we know what we're investing first. We know it's going to be an expensive thing. And if we have to take it all through litigation and then settle it, the costs are the costs. They're hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you go through trial, and if you don't win it, you just spent a couple of $100,000, and that's your loss as the lawyer. If you do win it, you get handsomely paid. But a junior person or even A person who's been practicing for 20 years, who doesn't concentrate on medical malpractice, does it here and there, is doing a terrible disservice to their clients.
What about the fact that insurance companies are afraid of your law firm? They're afraid of you. They're afraid of Stewart. They're afraid of your partners. I don't expect you to just admit to that, but do you think that familiarity of an insurance company with who is handling a malpractice case makes a difference?
Yes. And I know that for a fact because I've been told by insurers that if it's a Grossman, Roth, Yaffa Cohen case, it gets highlighted. This is not coming from just any law firm. Same thing is true of Cersei Denny in West Palm Beach. Chris Cersei is one of the great lawyers. People like that get highlighted. They pull the file and they realize this is not your average file because they know that we file cases that are legitimate. They know they're going to get a fight on their hands. They know we're not going to scrimp on the money we have to spend if we have to spend it. And they know we'll try a case if we have to try it. We're trial lawyers. We're not just litigators who hope to settle. We're trial lawyers.
Final question. What is your advice to younger lawyers or newer lawyers who, when they grow up, want to be a preeminent medical malpractice lawyer like you?
If they really want to do it and they have the love for it, because you better have the love for it, because it really takes a good part of your life away. I have 5 children that I raised with my wife, but the time away was tremendous in the early years, especially, in the early decades, especially. You have to be dedicated to being a malpractice lawyer. You have to be dedicated to just studying until you can't keep your eyes open. You have to be dedicated to just being stressed. Okay, they're not easy, these cases, these depositions, these trials. And so what you got to do is get yourself involved with somebody who has done this for a long time. Get the experience, watch what they do, learn from them, be yourself, but learn from their experience. And with time, if you do all of that and you really want to do it, you could be an excellent malpractice lawyer. It doesn't require a genius. It requires incredibly hard work.
You've helped a lot of people over the years, Gary, and I've always had the deepest respect for you, and I really appreciate your coming on today's episode. Thank you for joining us.
Good seeing you, Russ.
Please come back and join us. I'll keep you in mind. I want to have some panels on certain issues as things come up in the future and change up the show a little bit. But thank you for your time, and I hope that the information that you're giving makes a difference for our listeners.
I appreciate that. Good luck, Russ.
Thanks. And that wraps today's episode of the Interesting Lawyers Podcast. This is Russ Adler. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.